Welcome back to our fifth video in a series on the historical reliability of the Gospels. Today we will ask if the authors were able to record history. Are they good candidates to tell us about the life of Jesus? Let's get into it. In a previous video, I showed that the authors of the Gospels were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew and John were disciples or students of Jesus, making them excellent sources to talk about Jesus. They spent more time with Jesus than almost anyone else. Mark worked closely with Peter to compose his gospel, and Peter was a disciple of Jesus as well. Luke's closest connection to Jesus was Paul. Although Paul was not one of Jesus' 12 disciples, he had an experience seeing the resurrected Jesus, which transformed his life. Paul was also connected to Peter and others, and he was entrusted by the early church to carry forth the story of Jesus around the world. Luke's gospel and his subsequent book of Acts is written in a style that is distinct from the other three gospel writers. His higher vocabulary and orderly style appear to be the work of a careful historian. All four of the gospel writers, then, are in a good position to give us an accurate account of the life of Jesus. We might wonder if the authors were influenced from bias. You might even hear atheists or skeptics completely dismiss the historical value of the Gospels because the authors are Christian. After all, a well-intentioned reporter may distort information if they have strong bias for or against the topic in discussion. Now, everyone is biased to some degree, and it's no secret that the authors of the Gospels were themselves very much biased toward Christian belief. But just as bias can distort a report, it can also strengthen the care put into a report. Christian belief puts an emphasis on truth and honesty. As Christians, they would want to talk about Jesus rightly. And consider this. The early followers of Jesus were persecuted for their faith. So if the Christians are going to talk about the life of Jesus, they, more than anyone, would want to talk about Jesus accurately. Certainly, they would never want to suffer for telling a story that they were mistaken about. In this case, I wouldn't worry about bias working against their ability to recount what happened. A much bigger objection to the competency of these authors is that they wrote so long after the events they talk about. As I argued in a previous video, Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote probably in the 60s, John maybe in the 80s, but Jesus was killed in the early 30s. That means there were decades between the life of Jesus and the time when those gospel books were produced. Certainly you know from experience that memory fades even after a few weeks. Incidental details, like what you had for breakfast, can be forgotten within hours. So how could the disciples of Jesus possibly remember what happened decades ago? First, we have to acknowledge the culture that these authors lived in. Back in their time and place, the people transferred information primarily through spoken words rather than written words. It was commonplace to retain large amounts of information by rote memorization, and so their brains adapted and they were very good at it. Second, Jesus' words are spoken in a way that would have allowed for easy memorization. New Testament scholar Craig Blomberg pointed out that 80 to 90% of Jesus' words were written in a poetic fashion. That doesn't mean they rhymed, but they had a distinct rhythm, meter, parallels, and so forth. This would have aided in memory help. Third, it's easy to remember information if you are teaching it regularly. Since the disciples of Jesus were founders and leaders of the early church, they would have been talking about Jesus frequently, keeping all of their memories fresh until the gospel books were composed. Working together, if they felt themselves starting to forget an important detail, the others could have helped them out. Likewise, if one of them started to exaggerate or give false information, the others would have corrected them. Fourth, although the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written decades after Jesus, there's no reason to think that other unpublished writings of Jesus never existed before then. While traveling with Jesus, the disciples would have known that Jesus was making history, so it seems reasonable to suggest that at least some of them were taking notes along the way, or shortly after Jesus left them. These notes could have been used later when they decided to sit down and write their Gospels. Fifth, even if we can't trust the authors to remember small details, the Gospels focus on major events and teachings of Jesus. These events would have seared into their brain just as we remember details more clearly for important days or events of our own life. If you witness a blind person receive sight, or a crippled person start walking, or your own teacher resurrect from the dead 3 days after he was brutally murdered on a cross, you're going to remember those events vividly. Those events, and especially the resurrection, matter tremendously for those seeking to understand if Christianity is true. All things considered, I believe we can trust that the authors of the Gospels were able to record history. But there's one other conceivable problem you might hear that would affect their ability to give us an accurate report: whether or not their memories of Jesus were distorted under the influence of pagan gods in their own time. Maybe you've heard it said that Jesus was just a copy of older mythologies of dying and rising gods. We'll talk about that in the next video. I'll see you then.